Hey there, my name is Jackson Haime, or as some of you know me, Written Insanity, and welcome to Prompted, the official podcast for the writing prompts section of Reddit.com, where you are prompted to write stories, and here we showcase the best of them, all with the goal of helping each other become better writers. To those of you who are wondering about the smooth, buttery voice of Huntrosity, he's gone to the farm where podcasters go when they get sick. And by that I mean he's currently a little busy to be running Prompted, so I'm going to be taking over for the next while. Or forever. It depends whether I want to stage a coup. I am Written Insanity, fellow mod of r/writing prompt, as well as a prolific writer there when I'm in the mood. I'll just be reading the stories, so you don't need to know much other than my voice, which is here now, so you don't really need to worry about that part. Aside from the change in voice, there is not going to be much happening to the podcast. We're moving to a solid bi-weekly schedule, releasing on Fridays, and we are going to have some interviews, but always make sure to include the stories, as they are the reason you're here. Now that that's all out of the way, let's get right into it with our first story called Don't Turn the Page. This story was written for the writing prompt, "You wake up, the world is now governed by the qualities and physics of a 9-year-old's classroom doodles." Let's get into it. I am a creature of indiscernible age. I only know this. My body is made of 4 lines flanking a central line, which supports my head. I have 2 bug-like eyes and a goofy smile. No nose to speak of. I have a similarly formed friend called Sam, except she has a yellow blob of hair roughly shaped like a mango. Its most remarkable feature is that it stays stiff. Whenever we run, Sam's hair stays in place, at the same angle, though her limbs may contort in atomically disturbing ways. My mom is Mary, who wears a green dress and brown hair curves at her neck, not unlike a ram's horns. My mom is always smiling, except when she sees me pull Sam's mango/hair, and that's when her arms cross and her eyebrows angle down over the dots that are her eyes. We live in a house that has a front and side all on the same plane. There is smoke coming from the chimney at all points, in little curly puffs like dirty cotton. The path that leads to our house is the width of the door and then meanders sideways like a snake, slowly growing in width before disappearing somewhere to the right. Meanwhile, the river that flows down the mountains in the distance remains the same width while it travels down to the plain and lines parallel to the door before heading downward like a waterfall. The little semicircular bridge across the river looks too small for anyone to fit in. But the river is wide enough for my friends and I just to step across, so we're not too worried about that. The sun is a bright white circle framed by yellow. It's exactly 16 yellow lines emerge from it and then dissipate. The sky surrounding it is blue, and to the left you can see 5 blackbirds forming a big V made up of little V's. Across the river is an apple tree, which is taller than Sam but shorter than Mom or I. This is convenient because we can pluck apples with ease, and it always has fruit. It's nice to live here, with the pretty sun and the blue sky and the blue river and the little birds and the apple tree. But my mom says we only have one thing to dread. You see, we can't die here. We live on doing the same things, saying the same age. We do not move in time, only 2 dimensions. But there will come one time when we simply cease to exist. Be lost forever. It's called the Big Blackness. And that's when the big child in the sky, the one who draws us, decides to move on and turns the page. That was Don't Turn the Page by You Eclectic Literature. Eclectic's actually one of my favorite words. It means diverse. And so hopefully we'll see a lot of different prompts coming from him soon. Eclectic Literature really did make a really nice, uncomfortable feeling through the entire thing. The experience felt natural to the narrator, but none of it really made sense while still being relatable to anyone who's had to babysit a 9-year-old anytime soon, or any extremely young prompters, I guess, but I don't think we have any of them listening to the podcast. Our next story is called And the Darkness Consumed Me. No one here had ever gazed upon a starlit night sky and wondered what was beyond. I told them about my world, how the night sky was a source of wonder and creativity, how an ancient specimen of my ancestors in Egypt had tracked the stars and deciphered the plane of the ecliptic. They spun myth about how to make it palpable. To them, it was the chariot of the sun god that strode across the sky, twinkling glitters nothing but motes of dust frozen in time. But this was how we grew, and the mystical cocoon of outer space was gradually flaked off over the centuries, exposing the kernel of a truth far more fascinating than some god's chariot. My predecessors, like Rain and Kelper, spent half their lives gazing upon the stars and expanding the frontiers of knowledge. Modern astronomy, the craft that enabled me to come to your planet, I told them, was the product of this obsession with the night sky. For us, the night was a blessing. It was when the light switched off that the universe was laid bare and naked, an alluring seductress asking us to explore her body. And that's how we found you, I told them. What do you mean you come from space? There's a wall above us, and embedded in it are two rotating lights. There isn't anything else. Did you drill a hole in the wall? There is no wall. The yellowish blue sky is a mirage. It blends into black when you go high enough. Black like our cities. Yes. But our cities are black because we have a roof blocking the light. If space is black, that means there is a roof above it. For you, light is the norm because you have two suns always lighting your planet. The sky is black not because of a roof blocking your sun's light. It is black because your suns are tiny specks that cannot illuminate the vast darkness. Just like how the light at the end of a tunnel is insignificant when you go deep enough. But a tunnel has a roof. It was no use. They couldn't understand. For people who'd never seen the night sky, it was hard to imagine that their planet was perhaps a little rock in a larger space. They laughed at my stories. In their world, those foolish enough to stare at the sky for longer than a few seconds would spend the rest of their lives without functional eyes. Not that it mattered. In the caves deep beneath the surface where they lived, in their networked colonies, it was as dark as a starless night. Their optical faculties were limited for the occasional hunting/scavenging trips to the surface. Have you absorbed your dose of vitamins, human? My guide asked me. He was covering his eyes and squinting at me from the faint shadow of my surface rover. We don't absorb them. The sunlight merely catalyzes its creation from within my body itself. You humans are fascinating creatures. So are you. Pause. He looks around. I get up and pull up my sunglasses. I should be fine for a few more weeks now. Let's get back to your city. That was a quick vitamin for your fuel. Here are your rocks and dirt. Samples, I corrected him, as I carefully placed them in my container. The rover hummed, and we moved towards a large hill of boulders, each crack and crevice connected to a tunnel which were my entry ports to this ancient civilization that had thrived on this unlivable planet with 2 stars. My research trip would last another 30 years before the return shuttle would arrive with the next batch of human scientists to replace me. I looked back to the light at the end of the tunnel. It was a faint orb in the distance now. I put the thermal cameras to my eyes as I entered the city, and the darkness consumed me, just like it always does. That story was brought to you by WriterWhoWrites. If you like suspense, check out his ongoing story at r/caffeinatedwriter. Of course, he's not the only caffeinated writer. Most writers are in fact caffeinated in high degrees. And yes, I do know that joke completely sucked, and I'm sorry about it. But I needed to make it, and I'm not letting you drop it in editing, Keon. Speaking of editing, there was a jump there. I needed some water. Because Writer Who Writes, that was a wonderfully written story, but there were a lot of words in there that I almost had to look up the pronunciation of. Oh my goodness, that one was interesting for me to get through. That probably took the most takes of them all. And I think that's a compliment giving the style, but I'm not sure I like you anymore, and I was a fan before, man. This next story actually wasn't given a title by my editor, Keon, who is the person who titles all of these things, using themes that were shown in the actual story. On r/writing prompts, you don't usually title them, and sometimes we want to bury the lead. We want to let the story tell itself instead of explaining the prompt early, which is what I'm going to do here. So let's get right into the story. It was subtle at first. My keys would be in a different place than they were the night before. Sometimes the coffee table would be moved a few inches in either direction, successfully nailing my shin a few times. Simple annoyances, nothing to think about. I blamed my memory. Over the course of a month, I kept waking up to odd sounds from my apartment. There would normally be the sound of the fridge opening, or the guest room door closing. One night I could have sworn I heard flushing sounds, but I was terribly sleepy that night, so I naturally assumed that I imagined it. I thought I was being haunted by a ghost. I decided to catch whoever it was in the act. On Saturday night, I pressed my cheek against my bedroom door, listening intently for any sounds. An hour passed, and then another. I had sunk to my knees, dozing off from the natural fatigue that came with such late hours, and I heard the fridge opening. With a start, I burst through into the living room, frantically scanning for the intruder. The door to the guest room hit the wall from being thrown open, and I took chase, almost sliding out of control as I gripped the door frame and pulled myself through. I was met with nothing. The guest room, untouched as it always was, except for the window, which now let in a chilly wind. I stuck my head out even though I knew there was no way this is an escape route. It looked in all directions, and still there was nothing. In the wake of the night, only the sounds of the streets betrayed hints of any life. The next night I left a letter. Crudely written in notebook paper, it sat on the countertop, folded so that it would stand and be impossible to miss. I went to sleep that night, driven only by my short temper, and though it took hours, the empty dreams took me until morning. Could you at least contribute in some way, instead of barging in and doing what you want? I blinked repeatedly at the odd sight, shaking off the drowsiness that tempted to pull me back to sleep. The warmth and smell of freshly cooked breakfast caught me off guard. It took several minutes of relaxation before I relaxed enough to eat the simple meal. A freshly grilled cheese sandwich and eggs, sunny side up, just as I preferred. Next to it was an empty envelope, emblazoned with a singular word in brilliant gold. I failed to suppress a grin. Something about the sheer absurdity of the situation invoked a sense of amusement from me. Okay. I never saw their face, but each day something in my apartment was always different, displaced in some way, or clearly tampered with. My mysterious roommate had made their presence known, as invisible as they were. Each morning, I would be treated the same breakfast I always preferred, and each night, I'd prepare them a meal as well. It's not until maybe 2 weeks of this odd companionship that I realized the guest room was never dusty, always in impeccable condition. Sometimes, very early in the day, I could swear the sheets were still warm in the unmistakable presence of a person. I wonder who they are. That was a story by DJ Incognito. To the prompt, you slowly start to realize that you have a roommate. And I absolutely loved this prompt. Every prompt this week was Mod's Choice, and all of these stories were some of our favorites from those Mod's Choice prompts. This one in particular really got to me just because it had really great comedy and then just that really oddly fast, mysterious part in the middle where he's jumping into the guest room where you shift gears so absurdly that I needed to change the way I read it. Otherwise, it felt strange because I couldn't be serious for most of it, but I also couldn't be funny at that point. Of course, I don't think I'm funny usually, that's just how I need to act, so that my mod team will let me keep this job until Huntrocity comes back with his better voice. Either way, it's time for the next story. This last story actually doesn't come from r/writing prompts, but from r/prompted, the official subreddit of the official podcast of the Writing Prompts subreddit. If you go over there, you can find 1, the prompts that allows you to get part of this submission, 2, all of our previous shows, and 3, comments with our great, though admittedly quite tiny at the moment, community. Your support and contribution over there is the best way to get in contact with everyone who is in charge of the podcast and get your voice heard about what you want to hear, what you think we can improve, and asking when Huntrocity will be back. If you want to go there, once again, that's reddit.com/r/prompted, and this is the story we pulled from there this week. It was hot and muggy, and everyone was making fun of her. Head down and eyes welling, Morrigan stumbled off the bus and into the smell of gas and smog. Her school bag had never felt heavier, and never had she felt such an urge to just heave it onto the street and be done with it. Her flyaway hairs were tickling her sunburnt cheeks, and no matter how often she could back them away, they would come right back, and that's it. She was crying. Crying on the steps she had to share with hundreds of others because there were nor houses here, nor fields, nor mountains, nor anything but trash on the ground and dust in the air. She felt a tap on her shoulder and heard the guard say words she couldn't understand, and she cried all the more. He carried her bag for her and held her by the hand to the elevator. The doors clanked open and Morrigan plopped herself down on the bottom inside and put her head between her knees. The guard threw her one last look before dropping her bag off beside her and pressing her floor. The doors closed between them. The elevator clanked dully as it passed each floor, and Morrigan pressed her hands against her ears. It took 3 tries with the key before Morrigan managed to lurch her way into her apartment, slam the door behind her, drop her bag, slump onto the couch, and cover herself in the blanket. Even then, she couldn't escape the sound of someone hatingly doing their scales on a piano somewhere above her, or below her. She curled up all the tighter. She woke to the sound of her father closing the door. Her neck ached, her cheeks were crusty as his footsteps came close. She turned the other way and hid her face under a throw pillow. She could sense him leaning over her. "Tough first week at school, eh?" he said, patting her on the shoulder. She frowned into the fabric. A few moments passed, and he sat down by her head. "What, you're not going to talk to me anymore?" Morgan stayed silent. He lifted her head into his lap, and she looked up at him as he began to stroke her blonde hair. "Look, I know it's hard," he said, seeing her red-rimmed eyes and salty cheeks. "But soon enough you'll find yourself just as happy over here as you ever were back home." She turned away from him and stared at her reflection in the TV across the room. She caught her father's eye in its standby black and pointed to her cheeks. "Oh, get some aloe vera for that, don't worry," he said. She shook her head and pointed at her cheeks again, jabbing like she was trying to poke holes in her face. "They make fun of me," she said. He turned her face back toward him and kissed her forehead. "Morgan," he said, You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. They're just jealous. She frowned and turned away. He squeezed her shoulder. Hey, if you help me make dinner, I'll tell you a secret, okay? She slumped her way through the evening just helpfully enough, scrawling her homework, tossing silverware onto the table and dragging plates into the dishwasher once dinner was over. Pushing it closed, she looked at her father expectantly. It's a special secret, he said. I can only tell you when we can both see the stars. She frowned and pointed out the window to the sky outside, just as gray, hazy, and featureless as it had been all day. No worries, he assured her. I know just the place. They went down to the car park. She had brought her blanket and fell asleep in the back seat almost as soon as she lay down. Every now and then she would crack open her eyes and see the neon glow of the billboards, the fluorescent of the tunnels, the yellowish flush of streetlights, and finally the dark silhouettes of the trees against an even blacker sky. The next thing she knew, she was being carried up a hillside, still wrapped up tight. The air was colder, drier, and the slight breeze was fresh for once. He sat her down on the bench at the top, and then sat down beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulder. They stayed silent for a while, listening to the crickets chirp and the leaves rustling in the wind. She looked up and saw an ocean of pinpricks dotting the sky. Do you know who gave you them in the first place? He asked her. Mama? She guessed. He chuckled. She certainly would have if she could have, he said before staring off into the middle of the distance. A moment passed, and then she snapped back to the present. No, Belinus gave you those. Who's he? Her father traced his finger across the sky from east to west. He rides across the sky every day in a horse-drawn chariot. The more he sees you, the more he gives you. So I should just stay inside forever, she said. No, he interjected. Look, at night, when he can't be with us in person, he tells us stories in the constellations to keep us company, he said, pointing above him. And it's because he really likes you, he added, tracing his thumb from her left cheekbone over the bridge of her nose and to her right, that he gifts you with constellations that you can carry around. She gazed into the sky for a moment, finding lines between the stars. He hugged her tight and whispered in her ear, that way, no matter where or when you are, you'll never be alone. Morgan blushed, her face pressed up against the fabric of his shirt, feeling every last spot on her cheeks. She smiled, and in the perfect little patch of sky between her father's shoulder and neck, she saw the stars wink back at her. That right there was Piconeeks telling us the real reason why people have freckles. And that right there is our show. Those are the 4 stories we were going to read this week. 2 honorable mentions is 1, the image prompt of Crash Near the Ruins. The first entry by Cat Cafe Writer was fantastic. It just ended up being written too close to my recording date. And then separately, writing prompt in a world where killing someone means you gain their lifespan. You're an executioner that served world leaders for thousands of years. That one just got knocked out by a coin flip. Guys, this week's theme was the mod's choice prompts that have been chosen by a mod as exemplary in terms of inspiring people. We choose the actual prompts themselves, not the submissions, but these are submissions we felt were really special. A couple of our favorites on the mod team. As I mentioned before, the best way to support the show is to go to reddit.com/prompted and talk to us there. Let us know what you think. This week, we're bringing a prompt over there from Ryan Kinder's book, God Mod As He Is. This week's prompt: a young wizard is learning how to cast a spell. One wrong word brings comical results. What happened? That prompt and all of the prompts that show up on reddit.com/prompted are taken from Ryan Kinder's book, 1000 Awesome Writing Prompts. Links to that book and all of the prompts I mentioned today will be in the description so you can see them for yourselves. Remember, you need to jump over to reddit.com/prompted to answer that prompt and have a chance of getting on the next show for it. On the subreddit this week, we are going to have all of the finalists to our 5 million subscriber novelette contest up and waiting for you to read. These are the best novelettes that the Writing Prompt subreddit has put out, and they are really better than anyone should have managed to write in a month. I might read the winner out loud, but I don't know about that. It'd be pretty long. Thank you, finally, to all of the writers who contributed this week and all of the readers who sent us recommendations for the podcast. To all of my listeners, I'm sorry that I stole Huntrosity from you, but thanks for tuning in and staying with me for this long. I've been Written Insanity, and I'll be here in 2 weeks to give you the best of the subreddit when our theme will be... Keon, it just says we need to get Huntrosity back. That's not a theme. Now we'll figure it out. I've been Jackson Writes, and this has been Prompted. If you like what you heard here and you want to hear more, head on over to reddit.com/prompted to hear more. The next story is called And the Darkness Consumed Me, and it comes from the prompt, I didn't get this ready in advance. Thank you. Have a great day.